Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I am very excited to introduce you to a special guest, and her name is Jenny Yoder. Jenny brings business experience and leadership expertise in diverse roles within high-tech organizations, ranging from small business to Fortune 100 multinationals around the world. She is a certified Riso-Hudson Enneagram teacher and an accredited professional with the International Enneagram Association, as well as being a professional certified coach with the International Coaching Federation. And she holds a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in organizational management. Jenny's coaching clients from around the globe include leaders, professionals, high potential managers, and teams that face ever changing requirements, less resources, and increased demands during times of change and cultural transformation. And her expertise is in developing their ability to achieve high value and sustainable results by expanding their leadership skills. Now, on a personal note, Jenny was my instructor for an amazing weekend workshop that I did with her on the Enneagram and relationships, which was, like I said, excellent. And I'm just really excited to have you here with us, Jenny, specifically to focus on the lens of relationships and even more on how we can use the Enneagram for conflict resolution, which many of us can use some help and support with. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks. I'm really honored to be here as well. And yeah, conflict is one of those things that I think we all wish we could kind of just sort of go around it and hope it goes away. I found that doesn't really work so well, however.
So how about we get started with, for those people that have never heard of the Enneagram, what is it?
Yeah, so the Enneagram, it's spelled Enneagram, but it really just means 9-point figure, and it's pronounced just Enneagram. It basically means 9-point figure, right? So it's been around forever. I would say it probably since the 70s is when people have started really teaching it in the US, talking about it, writing books about it after that. I actually came across it as part of my certification in coaching, is where I was first exposed to it. And it just sort of was one of those things that intrigued me. I started making everyone I knew around me take the assessment because I just wanted to know, could it be possible? I often think about it as sort of a maybe like our standard operating system. I'm sure most people have heard about archetypes. It's sort of that idea. Like, how are we the same as other humans? And then how are we really different? So for me, I really do think about it as our habitual ways of how we think, how we feel, and then how we show up in the world or behave. So it's like a bunch of patterns, which then, of course, you can imagine. I often talk about it as, we all get up in the morning and we have a choice of 9 different glasses to put on, right? And every morning I pick up the same ones and I put them on, and that becomes my worldview, right? So it's this idea about how do I make my patterns more conscious so that I can make a choice instead of just reacting or doing what I've always done, right? It helps us expose kind of what those motivations are behind the patterns, which is why the patterns exist.
Oh, it's so exciting because, I mean, this whole podcast is founded on the idea that our inner world creates our outer world and driven by these unconscious habitual programs. And that when we can kind of soften or release those programs, then we can be more flexible and adaptable to put on different lens, if you will, to see the world in different ways, to be more objective in our decision making, and of course, to have more harmonious relationships. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by these programs, by these different lenses, if you will, that we see the world through?
Yeah, so the way I often work with teams on this in business is instead of trying to start out teaching 9 different types, which is like people don't want to pay attention until they get to their own, number one. Um, we all love to learn about ourselves, but not so much about other people unless we're having a problem or a conflict with someone else. Then we want to understand them, right? So the way I often talk about it initially for folks who aren't really familiar with it is that it's comprised of three different, what we call social styles, or the energy we show up in the world with other people. And then also our three coping styles, which again really impact how we work with conflict. And so it's that combination of 3 by 3 that makes up the 9 types. And that seems to be an easier way for people to get a sense of that energy, both of themselves and of other people, probably more of other people actually than of ourselves. Because many times, we have this habitual self-image, the way we think of ourselves. And so when we kind of read about it on a piece of paper, it's like, is that really me? Versus maybe someone else who observes us a lot goes, oh yeah, that's totally who you are. So that's often how I break it up to get people to have a sense of here's what that energy is and here's how I might respond to it differently so that I can be a situational leader versus, this is the kind of leader I always am, right? It's about the belief is we all have all 9 of those styles within us. Again, we just prefer to use one of them because it's always worked for us. And so really the Enneagram is sort of, I think of it as a roadmap. So how do we get more healthy in our type? How do we kind of notice the patterns when we're under stress? Because usually that changes how we show up. And then when we're more relaxed, how can we maybe experiment or try out other styles? And so it's really a roadmap to help us be more aware of those patterns and maybe make more choices or responses to what the situation calls for versus, I think it was Maslow who said, if all I have is a hammer, right, everything becomes a nail. So how do I respond as a leader to the situation versus this is what I've always done and I hope it works for you too, right?
So you mentioned, I think, 3 social styles, 3 coping styles, and creates this kind of 9 by 9. So when we kind of think of conflict, typical conflict, tell us a little bit more about these different styles and how knowing that can help us to adapt our behavior.
Yeah, so the first 3, our social styles, actually came a lot from we just noticed that, from the psychological standpoint, came from the work of Karen Horney, who did work with kids who noticed they kind of are in different social roles, right? How they show up. And if you think about it, for any of you who have kids, when they're born, some come out crying, some come out smiling, happy, some come out, they just kind of come out differently. So we do sort of think it may be genetic. In other words, it's not just our upbringing that creates those. I'm going to be like this because my brother was this way, or I'm going to be like this because my parent was this way. It seems like I grew up in a family of 9 kids. And so, we're not all the same, right? Even though we had the same parents, we grew up over the years in a very similar environment. So yeah, the 3 social styles, I often talk about them is the energy when I walk into a room when they're strangers and I don't know anyone, right? So the first energy we talk about is this initiating energy. So I walk with a straight path. I kind of know where I'm going. It's kind of like when I walk in the room, it's like I'm here, something can happen now. And in, again, 3 different ways because 3 styles have that more initiating energy. So those people think of themselves as active and direct. Something needs to happen. I might not be as in touch with one of my centers of intelligence as I am the other 2, because I'm making something happen, right? I need to make my impact kind of on the world. So it's that sense, even as a little kid, right? It's kind of like they know the path they're on and they're going to take it.
And would you be willing to share with us what the other 2 styles you mentioned initiating?
Sure.
What are the other 2?
Yeah, so the second one we talk about is called strategic long view. So it's this idea, traditionally it was called more the withdrawn style because I'm actually withdrawing to process things in my head. So it's like my gift is I can see around the corner where other people can't see. It might take me more time. I might not have, that quick initial answer because I'm processing, I'm connecting the dots. And actually, my head is more interesting than being out here with you people sometimes, right? So it's like a good place to go to really use my imagination, to process, to come up with new ideas. Um, Again, it's not always in certain work cultures, maybe the endorsed one, right? If I work in a creative agency or I work in, scientific research, or I'm in a place where where that is valued, right? That I can connect the dots, that I can take time to process, then it's a great thing, right? But again, you can imagine in conflict, right? If conflict comes, I might sort of withdraw from conflict, or I might kind of need time to go process it or think about it, because maybe in that moment, I don't really know what needs to happen, right? And then the third one we call altruist, or I think about it often as earning your way. So it's almost like I have this chatterbox mind, and I'm always checking in with my belief system, my values, whatever they are. They could be totally different. You and I could have totally different ones, but we're both feeling the need to check in. So when I walk in a room, the withdrawal type or the strategic long view, it's like I'm here, but I'm maybe going to be in the back of the room. I might need a role in order to feel like I belong, because I kind of feel like an outsider looking in. Um, the earn your way style, it's like I take a step and then I check, what is the right or responsible thing to do? So I might not make decisions as fast. I might want to go back and retrace my steps, because it's like I'm turning toward other people, but I'm not plowing ahead, right? Like an initiator might do. So there's kind of a difference in the energy, right, between all three of those.
Yeah, and it almost feels like that middle one, the altruist that you called, is almost like in between, yes, the withdrawal and the kind of
Yeah.
initiator energy.
Yeah. 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 So it's just a great way for people to check in, to notice the person I'm talking with, which of those energies are they showing up with? Because whether or not it's their home base or their preferred style, right? Depending on the situation, they may be showing up with any of those three, or a variation in between.
So people listening now might be kind of processing this and being like, yeah, in a room of people that I don't know, I tend to be more initiating, or I tend to be more withdrawing, or kind of the middle of the road, if you said, kind of a step forward, but need to verify kind of.
Yeah.
And so what is important for them about that, to know that about themselves? How does that impact conflict management if there is conflict in their life?
Yeah. So, by again, motivation of the types, because even though, again, if I might have three styles that are initiating energy, there's a different motivation for why I do that, right? So so a type three, an achiever, right? It might be more of that. I'm going to do it if it works for me this time, right? I'm going to kind of check out this conflict, and maybe sometimes I'll use the rules and sometimes I won't. Depends what works, because I got to be successful. Um, if I'm a seven, an enthusiast, I want to have fun. I want to have a good time. It's kind of like I don't want to get drugged down by conflict, right? Because it's just going to get in my way. So I'm just going to kind of go do what I think needs to be done. And then, we'll talk about it later, right? So I'm kind of just going to go around conflict. If I'm an eight, and it's combined with a different kind of energy, that emotional realness, I might let you know right out front, right, what I want to happen. And I might be in a telling mode to tell you what I think needs to happen, right? In a pretty forceful way. Again, it depends. And it depends how much under stress I am at the time. As to, I'm at my best level of development, or am I, in a good place, or am I in a place where I'm really stressed out as to how I might show up?
So this is a pretty deep well, I mean, of possibilities and different styles, as you said. And so if we were to just for a moment kind of put the Enneagram lens aside and just kind of look at this through the lens of, we have different motivations for behaving in the world in different ways. And of course, depending on whether we're stressed out, let's say incoherent, or coherent, more relaxed, or whether it's familiar setting or unfamiliar setting, of course, there could be some shifts in our behaviors, yes. Like, what is important for people listening that might be experiencing conflict to know, that could be helpful for them to just feel more ease in relationship?
I think what would be most helpful in terms of conflict is let's just talk a little bit about our coping style, which is that other component, because I think that's an easier one sometimes to determine or to notice when we're in a conflict. So the three ways of coping are, you can think about it a couple of different ways. One is what do I believe about emotion, right? How do I handle emotion? So the first style, which we call positive outlook, is I'm going to reframe all emotions to be positive, right? These are the people that, the glass is always half full. I'm going to make lemonade out of lemons. People who aren't this style might call them Pollyannas, or why do they have rose-colored glasses, or not looking at reality, right? But it's kind of like I don't want to see anything negative or painful myself, so I'm going to have the strategy of seeing everything good elsewhere, right? It helps me not to look at that. It's so interesting because the Enneagram is really about our strategy, our worldview. The problem is when we're in our ego, when we're showing up in our habitual patterns, it gets us the opposite of what we're trying to get to, right? So, which is why it's so important to understand it. So, back to these coping styles, right? So, if I believe in reframing emotions to be positive, when conflict comes, I'm going to try to talk you into the positive side, right? I kind of just want to go there. And it's my automatic kind of reflex. And I'm sure we all know people who you can kind of go, oh, yeah, those are those positive outlook people, right? Which is great. When I get a bad health diagnosis, I'm going to go search one of those people out because I want to feel better, right, about it. If I'm upset about something, I might not want to, search one of those people out because they might want to talk me out of it. And actually, if I'm upset, I don't want to be talked out of it, right? So the second style is what we call emotional realness. So it's this idea about if people don't, so these folks want to express emotion, whether it's good or whether it's positive or negative. It doesn't really matter. I want to express. And I kind of feel like something's missing if you don't want to express emotion. And so, again, think about the combination of a positive outlook and an emotional realness. The positive outlook person is trying to minimize the emotion and make it all positive. And the emotional realness person is feeling like you aren't even hearing me. So I'm going to express some more because obviously you don't get it. Right. So I'm looking for this response from that person that mirrors my own concern, whether I'm really happy, because that's how I judge, right? Are you with me or are you against me? Are you hiding something or are you here with me? And so again, it's usually kind of unconscious that I'm looking for this until I become aware, right? So it's really important for emotional realness people to, because they have a strong emotional reaction. It's almost like the brain bypasses that thinking center and goes right to that limbic system. And I have a strong emotion, and it's not like I just decide, okay, I think I'm going to get upset about this. That's not how it works. It's like a trigger and boom, right? I'm upset and I want to talk it out. It's like adrenaline, cortisol flood me. And until I can really express it or vent or just get it out, it's in my body, right? And so for them, it's really important to express emotion. And the third one we refer to as competency approach. So this is the type that actually represses emotion. They feel like emotions, they believe, they don't feel it. They believe emotions get in the way. And I don't know why you people are getting all worked up about this, right? We talk about it being drama and all these other things because it's kind of a belief that emotion gets in the way. So let's just roll up our sleeves and get the work done and put the emotion on the side. So you can imagine in conflict between those three styles, what we each do is we kind of try to convert the other person. Well, first we offer it, right? Here's my love offering. Here's the way you should respond to conflict because it's the way I respond. And then when they don't come around to our way, we kind of dig in our heels, right? And we keep kind of responding in the way we want to respond versus dropping our own approach and being willing to adjust to the other person, right? That's where the hard part comes in.
This is fascinating, I think, because especially for people who have not yet done like a lot of different assessments, they might be listening to you, Jenny, and being like, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's me. I'm positive outlook," or "Yeah, I'm definitely the one that represses," or "Definitely the one that's all out there, right? Emotionally ready to express everything." And so they're listening to this, maybe assessing where they are, and might be wondering like, okay, how is this impacting people in my life? If I'm a positive outlook person and my spouse, my child, my boss, my team member or friend is one that represses, you know, how is that showing up in our relationship? And am I really getting some resistance? Or maybe I'm completely blind to it. And so, how can they use this? I guess that's where my mind is going, because this is really helpful. And how can we use this?
Yeah, so I think the first piece is noticing what is my default, right? Because I actually can't, when we get down in the levels of development when we're not very healthy or really stressed out, we're not much good for anyone, right? And so instead of being the gift of my style, I'm showing up almost with the things that aren't so great about my style. And, there are some Enneagram books and people who kind of talk about it. It's almost like paint by number, oh, you're this, so I'm going to respond this way. And I would say that doesn't really work, because what really works is being a genuine human being, right? And being willing to really listen, not just to the words, but to the tone, to the emotion, to the whole person, and to really be willing to be there with them wherever they are at that time. And our propensity, our habitual way, is to approach it from the way we approach it with someone else, because we think, like, why would we do it our way if it wasn't the best way? So that's why I said it's almost like we offer it as a love offering in the beginning, like, just let's just sit down and talk about this when someone's very emotionally, and they're thinking, what's wrong with you? Like, you don't even care, or you're hiding something, or you're not on my side because I'm not expressing, yeah, that must really be horrible, or yes, that must be great. Or if, we have a positive outlook person and they're all looking at the positive side and I'm not that way, I'm thinking, you guys are on drugs. What is your problem? Like, don't you see the problem here? And so we just kind of continue in our default position because we don't know any different. No one really taught us, unless we were lucky enough to have, an environment where people were truly accepting of diversity and of, accepting all styles. We just tend to want to offer it to be our way because we actually think ours is the best way, right? We can't understand why people would respond a different way, right? And so it's like the longer the conflict goes, the more we dig our heels into our way. And what's really interesting, in the workshop that you attended, we talk about what is the role that I typically play by type in conflict. And when we start to notice that, I mean, I noticed it in my own life, right? I saw, where does my husband normally go and where do I go? And they weren't the same, as you might imagine. And, they were the source of a lot of ongoing conflict that we didn't even know how to put into words, the difference. And so, one of the things that our therapist had us do is to really say what was true on both sides. And the other person had to actually say back. So let's say you and I are in a conflict, right? I had to hear your position, everything you had to say about it, and then give back the essence of what I heard. So not my version of it, not blah, 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 but putting myself in your shoes and really being able to say both what was said and unsaid, what the emotions were about it, why you cared about it, to really truly see that other side. And until we can do that, it's really tough because our habitual response is to just keep responding in the way we think we should respond. We're not really taking in the other side, most of us, when it comes to conflict, because we want to be right, or we want to be successful, or we want to be in control. It's just sort of fascinating. I would say in life, most of us are looking for one of three things. Either we want to have control or power, or we want to have security, or maybe we call it safety. And three of the styles really want more about, I want to be valued, I want to belong, I want approval. And so, again, these strategies get buried in our conflicts. If two people are wanting different things out of a situation, that again can end up being a reason for conflict that we don't ever examine, right? We just don't go deep enough to really understand what's really at stake for me. Is it that I want autonomy? I want control? Am I looking for respect, or am I looking for approval? Do I want you to like me? What's really going on? Or do I just feel unsafe in this situation? Right? So there's so many components. The Enneagram is one of the components that helps us to understand conflict. Um, what most of us don't do is really understand the need behind the situation. And we don't talk about that, right? We have a story about the conflict, but we don't really talk about what's the human need underneath that I'm really trying to solve for.
Yeah, thank you. And as I hear you express that, what comes to mind is values. Because, for example, as you said, power or security or love and belonging, those are values. And so some people may have, as you said, power, way up high on the values list. It's in the hierarchy, or somebody might have
Yeah.
that very, very low. And, above might be love, or might be connection, recognition, giving and receiving recognition, whatever it might be, or safety. So I love how you kind of shared the example, of like in therapy, basically like mirroring what the other person says, the essence of what the other
Yeah.
person says. And if somebody wanted to do that, let's say with their spouse or with their team member at work or anybody, would it sound like I hear you say, or I sense that what are feeling is like, what would that sound like or feel like? Or
Yeah, so I've actually used that in work situations where I've been brought in to like negotiate or to help people mediate, right? About situations. It's really not negotiating, it's more mediation, where people just can't hear each other. And it's kind of fascinating. I did it with a group of about, I don't know, 6 or 7 people, and there were really 2 people, and then their managers were in there that had the conflict. And so I asked them, I said, what is your position? What's your concern about this? And then I asked the other person after they were done to be able to say back, so here's what I'm hearing, right? Or here's what I'm sensing is important to you about this. And again, it's not just repeating the words, it's being able to say, here's what I can sense matters to you. And when the other person hears it, they have the right to go, well, that's not quite it, because sometimes when we hear it back, we go, that's not quite it. So, it's kind of like I put a stake in the ground and I say, here's what I think, or here's what I'm sensing is true. And it was kind of fascinating because the other person could not even do that. They were so busy wanting to state their own position that they couldn't really. Someone else in the room had to finally say, okay, so time out. Here's what I heard. Did I capture it? And I think in conflict, that's what happens all the time in our personal lives, especially those long-standing conflicts, right? Where we really care about something. It's so hard to drop our own point of view because we're trying to convince the other person and we never really feel heard. So we keep repeating kind of the same stuff, um, versus really having appreciation of the other person's perspective and what really is at stake for them. Which is why I was talking about the real need behind it. Another really great book is called Nonviolent Communication, um, by Marshall Rosenberg. And it really talks about emotions are always a signpost, right? To what the need is. Either I have a positive emotion and it points to a need being met for which I can have appreciation and gratitude. If I have a negative emotion, it's a signpost that something's missing. And, that's something I use with my coaching clients all the time, because if I don't know what the real need is, conversations are strategies, right? To get our needs met. And so when I'm not really conscious to what my strategy is, right? What is the need underneath I'm trying to meet? It's really tough in a conflict to have that need be met, right? Because I'm not even conscious of it.
so these are excellent, excellent kind of strategies, right? To go inward and notice what's important to us or what we're needing here, to kind of hallucinate what the other person might be needing, or to ask them, what is important to you
Yeah.
here? What do you need? And maybe mirroring back what we sense they need, or what we sense we see or hear, or, have them feel. And then, like you said, they can reject it or they can accept it. Either way, they're more clear about how they're feeling and what they need. So, what other tools or strategies do you have when you go into work with teams where there is already some existing conflict?
Yeah, so often I'll talk about these three coping strategies. And, also when you think about those coping strategies, if I'm an initiator, I come across pretty strong probably in my story, right? I might have some needs about it meeting my needs first, right? If I'm more of a processor, I might not know what is really up for me right now. So I might need some time to connect the dots and process and come back later when I'm more clear. If I kind of think, I got to do the right or responsible thing here, it's hard to meet my own needs and meet the needs of what's right or responsible. So there can be a lot of turmoil even within that style of what is the thing I want to do, right? Because I'm trying to do the right or responsible thing according to these beliefs in my head or this inner critic in my head. So, there's all this stuff going on. It's a lot of stuff going on. And most of it, I would say, is more unconscious than conscious, which is what's really tough. So if I can't really see your point of view, if I don't really like the way your energy is coming across because it's not like mine, right? That's another way because it can seem like it's all about you if you're an initiator, or it can seem like, you're just withdrawing. You don't even care about talking about it, or while you're really just trying to process it. Or it can seem like you're indecisive, you're kind of torn about what is really the right thing. And I just want to move forward. So there's all these other dynamics that come in. And I would say the more fear and defensiveness we have about a particular topic, the more we kind of go down those levels of development. So we're not acting so much like an adult anymore. We're kind of back in that I want it this way and it needs to be this way, or this is the right way. And I'm kind of convinced and I'm trying to convince you. So I'm spending more time convincing you of my position versus really taking yours in when I have fear and defensiveness, right? So it might be easier for some of us at work where we have our best selves showing up, right? To deal or to, and again, dealing with conflict is kind of crazy because it always involves other people, right? So we can't really deal with people because then they're objects. It's how do I connect with other people and really get a sense of where they're coming from, and to be willing to drop my preferences and join you authentically where you are. Because most people respond to authenticity, unless I'm kind of off the charts for some other reason. And when I'm in my habitual pattern, I'm not really connecting with you. I'm just showing up, in my patterns that have always worked for me. And I'm trying to sell you actually on my patterns. And I wish you would get a clue and be more like me, right? It's kind of what we're thinking in our heads. Some of us say it out loud and some of us just think it in our heads, right? So yeah, it's kind of tough.
So this is really cool because I mean, you even said kind of that magic word, right? Beliefs,
Yeah.
which of course, many of them are so deeply unconscious to us. We're behaving out of them, but we're clueless as to what's driving the bus. So tell us a little bit more about how our belief systems impact our behavior, especially in conflict situations.
Well, when we get in that unhealthy mode, which is where our type shows up, actually, when we're in a healthy mode, we do what the situation requires, we adapt ourselves, and, there's not an issue of our type, right? When we're in that unhealthy mode, we are, kind of being pulled by our overall strategy of our type. So some of us, our goal is to be successful and never fail because that's what gives me value. For some of us, we feel too much anxiety if we don't have a plan B and a plan C. We want to feel safe in the world. For some of us, we feel anxiety, so we're out having lots of choices and options so we don't feel that anxiety. So what's important is noticing what we're actually up to, and I would just say that the Enneagram has been the most useful tool And a lot of people say, oh, it's too complex, it's too deep, I just am going to use the surface of it. And what I have found to be true is that it's like an evolving learning process. It goes beyond our type even. Um, it gives us some pointers to help us see some of that unconscious stuff behind, our, because everybody has this habitual self-image. Then we have our actual behavior, which everybody else sees and can assign motivations to it, right? And then we have our actual own motivations. And I would say a lot of those motivations, until I understood the Enneagram, were really a mystery to me. And other people might have seen the motivation or guessed at the motivation, but I truly didn't see it. So it was like an eye opener to realize that there are things we have in common with other types, and there are things that are not the same as other types. I mean, there are really differences in people by type. And then there's our unique life experience, our personal, development, our personal culture, all of those things, our gender, all of those kinds of things impacted as well. So while it is complex, I would say it has been the most helpful to understand what some of those patterns are about and to be able to help people uncover. So as a coach, it's really useful because I don't want people to think I read their minds. On the other hand, when they use certain words all the time, when they talk about certain experiences in the same way, I can kind of guess and be curious about, so what's really going on here? Because it's hard to change if you don't have a personal motivation and if you don't have a path that works for you. Because everyone's unique, right? They're way more than their type that they identify with. So I don't ever try to use the Enneagram as a box to put people in. It's more, let me see what box I'm already in so I can get out of it, right? Because most of these things have worked for us. I mean, if we didn't have a personality or an ego, we wouldn't have existed as children, right? We have to have it. So it's how do we use it in a way that's healthy and is useful in the world versus how do I just be blind and keep kind of doing what I've always done as long as it works. And it helps, I think, in conflict to realize, oh, what's this person up to, right? In conflict. And what am I up to is the most important thing, because knowing what we're up to, it has to start with us, right? In a conflict.
And what are some questions that we can ask ourselves to identify what we're up to? What's really the energy underneath what we're thinking and feeling and doing?
Yeah. So, I came up with 3 questions that I give to teams around conflict. And it's really about those 3 coping styles, right? So each of those coping styles has a question they're really good at answering and trying to get through in the conflict. And then there's the ones that we don't want to ask that question, right? So the 3 questions that we might want to think about in a conflict are around positive outlook. It would be, what would success look like, or what would be the most positive outcome for both sides, right? Would be a question from the positive outlook people. From the emotional realness people, it might be, what do I most care about, right? What is the most important piece here? Or what is the most important emotion? Emotion is what I care about, right? From my heart center. And then in terms of the competency approach, it's, really what are the facts versus what are the assumptions, right, that I'm making? Because they're really good at seeing the logic and the data. What they're not so good at is seeing the emotions, right? The positive people are good at seeing what could be possible. They're not so good at negative emotions or of looking at sometimes the good and the bad both, right? So oftentimes in a conflict, we're trying to get our own question answered. We're not looking at all 3 aspects because they're all 3 useful, right, in solving a conflict. It's not that one is any better than the other. It's how do we incorporate all 3?
Brilliant questions. And and I like the simplicity of them so that we can ask those questions. And it's almost like if we have a dichotomy, right? Like a stick, if you will, with 2 ends, right? So the positive outlook is somewhere on this end, right? And then there's the opposite of that which it's not. right? And so by asking these questions, we're kind of giving an opportunity to accept, to kind of acknowledge both sides, if you will,
Yep.
of the stick, both ends of the stick. And I imagine that just in doing that, in getting a chance to express and voice what we need, what's important to us, then it creates even more like harmony in the team or the group, or even within an individual if we're talking about ourselves.
Yeah, because I would say, if I have two people in a conflict that are both emotional realness, there might be a lot of shouting going on, right? Or a lot of emotion and not so much on the facts and not so much on what's possible, right? If I have two positive outlook people, we're maybe like, oh, yes, everything's fine. But, actually underneath the surface, not so much. If I have two competency people, they're just talking about the logic and the data and blah, blah, blah. So again, our type is made up of using all three centers of intelligence: our head intelligence, that logic fact, our heart intelligence, how we feel, that emotion, what we care about, and our gut or our body, right? How do we take action? How do we make something happen in the world? Um, by type, what we're doing is leaving out one of those centers of intelligence, which is why we're not in touch with that greater intelligence, that greater love, that greater what needs to happen, right? So the more we can utilize those three centers of intelligence and, the three different coping mechanisms and the three social styles, because there's a time for initiation, right? If no one ever initiated anything, would anything ever happen, right? Um, truly, if no one could connect the dots and had that strategic long view about what can happen around the corner, like what are the unintended consequences, or what about the connections of, how do I make electricity, right? That's a really important skill. And how do I really do the right or responsible thing? How do I do what really is best for all? And so that those energies all are important. It's our attachment to our particular one that gets us into trouble, and leaving out really using all three centers of intelligence.
So how can we do that? How can we really utilize, right, kind of express or embrace all three levels of intelligence?
Well, a question really is for my, it's kind of back to those coping questions. What is it that I really care about? What is the real need, right? Um, Noticing the emotion that's there, noticing what is really true, what is a fact versus, stories I'm telling myself or the world is telling ourselves. Um, what is it really that that's that part of the thinking brain. And then what are really some actions we can take that it might not solve the whole problem, but what is at least one next step, right, to take me in that direction? So I think it's about just noticing, by knowing by type, what do I tend to leave out, right? And so noticing what it is a step toward doing what will help me address the situation as, per my gifts, right? And being willing to be flexible and adaptable versus it's got to be my way. Or, I wish everyone was like me because don't they see what I see? Right? Yeah. And the truth is we don't. Yeah.
And I think that's the essence of this conversation, Jenny, is just, consciousness. It's just to become aware, to ask ourselves these powerful questions, to become conscious of the unconscious needs, feelings, sensations, thoughts, express those in a respectful, genuine way. Ask others where they're coming from, and just suspending disbelief in the sense of just leaning toward the other person, being curious, being compassionate. As you said, they've got their own beliefs, their own blind spots, as do we. And when we can come together and really listen, we may actually co-create something that's better than mine or theirs, right? Something that's greater than the parts. And so I think that this conversation was really important, Jenny, because I think the Enneagram is one tool, as you said, out of many that can help us to get a little bit more clear understanding about what are some of the beliefs or unconscious patterns that are driving certain behaviors that are motivating us to do certain things. Maybe when we can also get that about other people in a team environment, when we can see,
Yeah, yeah,
their, personality type and so on, it can just bring more compassion and empathy, and at
yeah,
very least curiosity.
yeah,
So, I think that really when we can become conscious, we can be a choice.
yeah.
Do we wish to be more flexibly here? Do we wish to get a little more information or just kind of soften our own approach a little bit more? And that can drive solutions and connection, of course. So thank you, Jenny. Is there anything else that before we complete here that you believe is really important for the listeners to know in order to create more harmonious relationships in their life?
Well, I would just say, the more mindful we are, the more present to what's really going on in all those three centers of intelligence, the more choice we probably have, right? The less fear, the less defensiveness. Um, and I did just want to mention, I do have another workshop coming up, the Enneagram and Relationships, the same one that you went to, October 8 and 9. So if you want to go out to my website, check it out, you can register there. It's for people in business, people in personal relationships. I always have a big mix of people that might be in a relationship, some that wish they were in a relationship, some that just got out of one, or someone who has a boss, they were like, what the heck is going on with my boss? Or a teammate. I just want to understand what's going on with them. So it's 2 days, and I'd love you to have any of you join us.
Thank you. And how can people learn more about that? What is your website?
So it's trinityperformancegroup.org, O-R-G. So you can find it there.
Thank you for taking us through this today. I really believe in the Enneagram. It's an amazing, extraordinary tool. You do a great job teaching it, and I'm really grateful you're here. Thank you.
Thank you.